do we have legitimacy to do this or not, with top or bottom? That was what it was about. After the revolution, in a sense, after Tiananmen Square, after '68 in France, you tend to get much more issue specificity. People are not fighting about those issues in general. And so we have people in Japan and in China with dog walkers in Beijing. How should the dog walkers do? I mean, that's the kind of issue which is now being so people make fun of that because it's not big stuff. But the point is, it's not violent. Okay, how do we then bring in the demonstrations? Which you have in Hong Kong, Kiev, etc. These are spreading around the world. These did not originate in Japan or China. But the Japanese in China and Japanese and Chinese in that sense are following, especially from the Middle East, the Latin Americans, and the continental Southern Europeans. This is not a Swedish, an English, Scottish style. This is a French, Spanish, Greek style of massive street demonstrations, and then feeding into, the crowd can then potentially transform the political system. And that happened, as I pointed out, in Cairo. It happened in Kiev. After a week or two of demonstration, the president of the country resigned. Okay, so these are politically very important. These are trickling in, and so in the beginnings, when these came to Japan, the Japanese state and the Japanese leaders tend to try to calm them. But the dramatic thing, as you pointed out briefly, is they're generally handled very peacefully, very neatly. There's a sense of keeping things in place, and to try to build a sense of trust. Again, Japan, here difference between China and Japan, trust, and linking this down to if the World Values Survey has a standard item. What are the values you most respect in children, and how should parents treat children? Okay. And the standard list of 15 or 20 items asked in 100 countries. Which country said most of all, the number one concern in raising children should be to teach them to respect their parents? Korea. The Korean parents were off the charts. They were the highest because the Koreans have a mixture, more so than China or Japan. They have a mixture in a fundamental way of Western and traditional Oriental religions. You've got Buddhism and Confucianism on the one hand, then you've got Catholicism and these evangelical Protestants, Mormons, Baptists, and so forth that are going to Latin. And inside Korea, they're fighting each other. And elements of this similarly have been going back for centuries. Read the literature. Okay. So one point more. I'm going to trying to get into violence. Korea is a small country. It was continually they fought wars. They fought mostly the Chinese, the Manchurians, and the Japanese. And who won? Never the Koreans. They always lost because these were big, strong countries around. They crushed the Koreans again and again and again. So if you're a young Korean, what do? You act as an individual, what today is called terrorist. So there's statues in Seoul today for people who in earlier years, and so the Japanese militarily occupied Korea for most of from the 20th century, early 20th century until 1945. Right, so the Koreans hate the Japanese today to a large degree still, and so they refuse to have. They would not let you sell any Toyotas, any cars, any radios, television. Nothing could come in from Japan. That's etc. So I'm dealing now with the culture of violence. Violence was generated by, in a sense, the Japanese occupation, which was very strong. The young Koreans trying to respond to that became heroes, like the jihadists today in the Middle East. There's statues in Seoul, and these for individuals, and these individuals would do things like go to Tokyo and murder, you know, a guy who was a Japanese general who had been the occupying lead inside Korea. So you have individual acts of terrorism, and so a statue of that guy would be put up in Seoul. Okay, so in a sense, and if you read the literature, and this goes back 1,000 years. They write little poems the night before going into battle, and it says in footnote, and he died the next day. Okay, so that, I mean, in that sense, okay, yes.
Are you saying the Koreans became like more individual, or are you saying they also became less patriotic for their country too?
No, I'd say they were more patriotic because they would sacrifice their lives for their country, for Korea, and they would, you know, they commit suicide in a symbolic attack on one Japanese general, even in Tokyo. So in that sense, and so the culture, but I'm making a point that the Koreans, long before 1945, the Koreans had elements of this based on fighting those wars with the other Asian countries. So I'm taking a few minutes on this because we've got you Asians here asking these questions, and you don't read about what I've been saying in most of these books, especially the Koreans. I mean, the Japanese, there's a big literature on Japan. There's very little on Korea, but to understand better how and why China is different from Korea, is different from Japan, these are some big things which I've learned from 30 years of talking to people from the three countries and helping them compare. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of building off of like the violence.
Yeah, I'm not done, but so if you said you wanted to wait till the end, we're not there. If you want to talk now, go ahead.
Well, you can go to the end.
Okay, well, let me try to wrap up and then comment. I'm trying to give you an integrated interpretation. Okay, so and the pieces basically are not one factor, one kind of piece, but these elements, which as you see, we're going beyond your paper. We're trying to give some framework for it. Okay, so violence, long term, coming up, the sense of the legitimacy of individuals in Korea. By contrast, and then the sense. Okay, but given the division, the multiplicity of subcultures within Korea for a long time, as well as today, lead to the sense that, you know, Korean parents have got these children who are not following their parents. So their answer in the past was, like black kids in Brownsville, beat them up. Okay, obey your parents. Not all, but many. By contrast, the Japanese parents in Asia in general are terribly concerned about their children. They do an enormous amount to help their children. They fund their education. They often buy them a home. They also expect the children to take care of them 30, 50 years later and to have parents and grandparents living potentially together in the same house, and that's the old model. Okay, the young are reacting in a more Western individualized way and gradually moving away from this. And so in terms of, but to try to keep this closer to the violence theme, the key point is the Japanese and the Chinese may be second, and the Koreans last in this comparison. The Japanese and parents and children are very close. They have virtually no open kind of violence. The children, from an American Western standpoint, are unbelievably spoiled. That is, they're given all kinds of things. At the same time, they learn discipline. They internalize discipline. But it's taught in the schools in a very egalitarian way. After 1945, the teachers' union was communist, strongly egalitarian, and every child in a class is the total opposite of the French. The French here rank everybody, top to bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4. You get gold stars for a week if you're first in the class. Japanese, the opposite. If Johnny was having trouble learning the multiplication table, the whole class would stop and help Johnny, until each person in the class together You go swimming in a French pool, and every kid is slamming against everybody else. They're splashing in the water. It's chaos. It's like the French Revolution. You go swimming in a Japanese pool, and what's it like? You maybe have 6 lanes, and every single lane, there's one kid, maybe 1 foot behind the next kid, and they're all swimming in a little line, and they're just like little ants in an ant tribe. That is, they're disciplined. Everybody stays in their place. Nobody has to tell them to do that. It's the totally opposite of the French. And they've internalized a sense of discipline and trust. Okay, trust, critical. You have a suitcase. You're in Tokyo Railroad Station. You want to go to Osaka. And you don't want to take, you got 2 bags. You say, that's too much. I'll leave 1 bag right here. You go to the central waiting room of the station. You leave your bag there with 500 other bags. You don't check it. You don't lock it. You come back a week later and your bag is there. Okay, that doesn't happen in China. It doesn't happen in New York or Rome. You know, they'd all be gone. Okay. So the point is, there's a sense of official, regulated trust. People don't lock their bicycles in the streets in Tokyo. Bikes are just there. Nobody steals bikes. Nobody steals suitcases. There's a sense of officially backed trust, regulation, so on some occasions you'll have police. But the point is, there's this legitimacy of the political system and the social system that is so powerful in Japan. Add one more piece. Do they have immigrants? Anna, anybody? Almost none. And compared to most other countries in the world, almost no immigrants. So in that sense, it's a closed society, culture. So, but in part because they're so concerned to preserve the sense of, Okay. All right. So I can go on, but maybe I've taken too much time already. And we got 3 hands. So you've got 2 new hands. But first of all, Letty in red. Tell us your name.
I'm Christina.
Christina. Okay, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, kind of building off of like some of the points made, even going back to like the samurai and the theater. And you might have already, hopefully I'm not like reciting things you maybe already done in research, but like with a lot of the protests and like civil unrest happening in the 60s, there were a lot of women taking the forefront, so maybe that might have to do like the post-riot era, like, maybe it was the reaction to seeing women in those positions that kind of put off people from those very physical temporal movements. And then I feel like a really good, like going that first row, like could be a lot of cool items too, because it's just really like a post-war era of, they're very shameful, like what has happened and like all that they kind of lost with like bombings and stuff. And even in the 60s, there's the Tokyo Olympics, which led to a lot of, like in the 50s, there was a lot of not very good infrastructure and like sewage systems. It was all pretty bad and everything was kind of in a messy situation in the 60s when we started getting ready for the Olympics, which in 64, which they're supposed to host in 1940, but because of World War II got canceled because no one wanted to host it there, it was this kind of chance to reclaim, this pride that they have on an international level and kind of show the Western world what they can do. And like you see, like a lot of the buildings and like stadiums built for the Olympics in that time had a lot of both Japanese but also Western architectural influence. So definitely I think the Olympics could be a good foundation into like what is come for the future. And then also in like the 80s, like with all those like big companies and a lot of, there's like, I think it's called like the bubble era of how much, like all the things happen. So, and there's like, I think either Tokyo or Japan Inc. So like maybe that like economic, this final like reach for like economic surety that kind of helped temper down what people's insecurities about living in. This is kind of maybe a different way also bringing in like country observations, and I don't know if there's actually a whole lot talking about this, but maybe even in terms of like addressing violence and how Japanese reacted to it and more in times post these protests. There's like the Vincent Chin murder here where a Chinese man was killed because they thought, 2 men thought that he was Japanese and they were angry about losing their jobs to Toyota and stuff. And I wonder what people, I know what the Asian American community here thought, but I wonder how the Japanese and maybe Chinese people reacted to that, and maybe that made them more averse to violence. So maybe that's another thing to look at. Yeah, those are just some points.
Two other hands, yeah.
I think it's also interesting how the Japanese economy, you'll find like a lot of like South Asians in the service sector. So it's diverse like for like low-level jobs, but every other like high-end job is strictly Japanese.
Yeah?
I just got a report about, like, well, I was thinking a lot about how, when you mentioned how the school children and classes are really well behaved, in Korea there's like a huge problem where bullying is really normalized. So you'll see a lot of like videos online of like little girls getting beaten up by their classmates, and like there's like superficiality and keeping up with the status quo is very important. I don't know about like Japanese culture, but definitely like Korean culture. So I'm wondering how much of this culture based on like trust and nationality is also very much grounded in like how much you can't stand out and yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about. Because like a lot of the corporal punishment is done at school as well. And I think like teachers are like, they're definitely legally allowed to be violent, and there's no there's no like flashing back from parents or the school administration if like teachers are violent. Yeah.
Well, I'm agreeing with you on the violence in Korea, but the question is, why is Korea different?
Yeah.
And that's what I tried to answer.
Oh, that's why I brought up the superficiality. Oh, no, not within like. You think
The Korean school teachers, the Korean parents beat up their kids. They use more violence than the Japanese. Is the general point.
That comes from a history of like independent activist movements that like sacrifice themselves?
Well, I mean, in the distant past, there are lots of things, and I'm trying to go to one or two of the big things. There are 15 other things that we could try to bring in, but the point is, I mean, the general point, if we try to ask questions like this, why is Korea this way, is to try to see if there's some big things which some of the experts who really studied these closely, do they agree on some of the big patterns? Because I mean, I use this, but I'm not an expert area. I mean, I don't spend my whole career on Asia, so I'm trying to use general models which are applicable internationally to interpret some things, but I'm conscious of my limitations, and I'm not trying to go too far beyond things that I know about. So, the simple point I'm making is, if we can get some big historical reasons for the differences, such as these elements of Japanese culture which have lasted for hundreds of years, these help answer the question of what's the cultural policy of Japan today, and how and why is it related to China, and the meaty meetings of how to change and confront the cultural policies in the respective countries, for instance. Okay, so, but to come back to corporeal violence, I related that in turn to the degree to which this has persisted over time in the survey item, where the Korean parents would say 20, 30 years ago, the most important value for a child is to respect the parents because of and I'm pointing to the longer historical things, the wars, but second, the diversity within Korean society today, which is very different from Japan. So Japan is the most nationally integrated, of having no immigrants, no subcultures that are very visible. That is the main one is probably rural-urban. So the urban, more highly educated do not have LDP. I didn't say that because I sort of assumed you knew. That is the LDP model of clientelistic domination of the political system and no challenging of the emperor works and holds in the rural areas. It's seen as legitimate. People vote for the LDP. So you're interpreting, I wouldn't look for one election, how it's changed. Look at the big, the big pieces. The urban areas, as I've said more than once already, do not have LDP mayors. All the big cities in Tokyo voted them out decades ago. So they are Western, they're more Western, more individualistic, more achievement oriented, and they don't respect the LDP clientelism and some of that which goes with some of the holding companies' traditional patterns. One other just quick observation on women, that is, women have, after World War II, women in Japan, in all these countries, especially Japan, have gotten lots more education, but simultaneously they feel strong connection to their families. So they may do just as well as men in schools and in their first jobs. So it may be that Toyota and others will hire men and women, but after 2, 3, 4 years, the women have children, and then they leave those jobs for probably for life. Same thing pretty much happens in Italy. That is the model of the mother as a cultural ideal for women is stronger in Japan and in Italy than it is obviously in the U.S. In the U.S., you can have women who are very successful professionally who may raise, that is, some of them will keep on working the whole time and will both work and raise their families, but many will also work half-time or take different jobs while they're raising their children until their children go away to college. Then after they go away to college, then some of those women re-enter the labor force at a very high, okay, so while they're raising their children, what do? This, I think, was the point that you brought out that I commented on. They often work around their household and in politics, and they work with the local traditional lower status men who are the LDP and other party organizers. So you've got these talented, underemployed women across Japan who are political activists, not in the Tocquevillian way, but working with the LDP party to help the party move ahead in a way that doesn't fit the Western model. Okay, so that's part of the linkage of adding gender, but not in a sense of just saying Japan is this way, but of saying if the family is stronger and more hierarchical, as it is, and the nuclear family is the key. China, the family unit is it's a broader, that is, that the nuclear family is weaker and the broader cousins and uncles and grandparents and so forth are more important. And obviously I'm speaking of national averages. They're clearly there are variations within each of the countries, but the big things are how these are being challenged for sure by younger individualizing people, such as the people who have elected the mayors of Tokyo, Osaka, all the big Japanese cities. And you find, as I've discussed, being based on, my best informants are the people like you in this class. That is, you're intellectually smart, creative people from China, from Japan, from Korea, and I listen to you. And then you in turn have given me things to read, and so forth, and that's where these things that is if you're here, you're seeing the conflict between the Western individualized achievement and the traditional Asian, and where those things get worked out is can be mapped as in the Divu PhD, where he mapped different neighborhoods in Beijing, showing that some of them had amenities that were more responsive to the younger Western individualistic residents, and others were more traditional Chinese with temples, museums, cultural centers, and housing, which was more consistent with the traditional Chinese pattern. So these general points feed into neighborhood differences within cities. And I'll just add one more piece here, which is you have very minimal zoning and planning in Asia. So the samurai, in a sense, you could say, it wasn't a general zoning for all of Tokyo or Japanese cities. It was one specific group. So you have elements like that, or a temple. A temple will have things around it. Or the Emperor's Palace in Beijing clearly has a neighborhood which is surrounding that. But in general, you don't have planning. Chicago is a city, Banfield said there's no planning in Chicago. And compared to the ideal of Paris, Chicago is unplanned. But compared to most Asian cities, Chicago has streets where you have no gasoline stations, no shops, no retail. They're strictly residential. And other streets, a street like 55th Street, 53rd Street in in Hyde Park, where you have all of the commercial. You don't have that commercial stuff on every single street. So in that sense, whereas by contrast, in the Asian cities, you do, all these things are mixed in far more. So in that sense, the lack of zoning leads to more unusual combinations and the need to introduce these cultural elements to explain what goes where, and that you can have a Baptist church in Seoul holding a 10 p.m. Bible reading class at the same time that you have a nightclub with striptease going on that's 2 doors away, and you have a primary school right next to that, all in the same block. You know, that would be totally illegal in Chicago. You can't serve liquor, within I forgot what it is, 1,000 feet or something of any school in Chicago, etc. Okay, so I'm moving into some of the next section. That is, what I'm trying to do in general is to look at the section of the course that we're moving into is looking at some unusual cities. And we're using here Japanese cities and Chinese cities more generally, as well as Tokyo specifically, and how Tokyo and the big Japanese cities are different from the little Japanese cities in the LDP. But the point I'm making, which I'm trying to make explicit here, is why are these individual cities so different? Why are they internationally important and unusual? Just give one example nearby. Downers Grove, Illinois, is a west side, middle-sized suburb of Chicago. They may be the most innovative city in the world in the use of citizen surveys. I've had people come here from France, from Germany, from Sweden. They go to Downers Grove, and Downers Grove for over 20 years has sent out citizen surveys, maybe 100 items. They send them out with they used to be maybe both email, but also with I think it's the tax bill. So you have a property tax bill. You also get a questionnaire, and so they would get a questionnaire with maybe 100. So they ask questions. How courteous are the school crossing guards? How often do you have a leaky? And do you have water jammed up in the sewers or whatever in the drains in your street? How much are there leaves? How much is the grass not trimmed properly in the sidewalk on your block? So we've got very local, specific questions, and then so I've had the staff come to class and talk about this because this city is so amazing. I've had the police chief, the city manager, assistant city managers come and talk about how these things work. This city has an amazing culture of citizen responsiveness, which goes way, and it's the opposite of the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago used to be hierarchical. And so in that sense, Downers Grove has the police, the city manager, and so forth. And so now, I won't go back to the why in history, but the point is, it's internationally important, and that's the kind of thing that we've tried to feature in the readings, and then try to say, in part, where did it come from, but then how might it be generalized and used in other places? Because citizens are on the rise globally. What are some service delivery mechanisms that we can use that will satisfy citizens? And I would say, look at Downers Grove. Downers Grove measures the percentage that say the school crossing guards are polite, and if their courtesy rating goes from 97% to 92%, but the librarian's courtesy stays at 97%, then the school crossing guards, may lose a salary increase. So there clearly is targeted, explicit discussion of what are you paid, how good a job are you doing, with very deep, and so they have thousands of answers. It's not just 1,000 answers. Don't remember the numbers. It's in a book called Urban Innovation. But that is the point. Is there are interesting innovations around the whole world, and how those can be shared, but also interpreted. That is, where are they feasible? That is, where might this work? And I'm suggesting elements of this could be potentially used by the Chinese. And the Chinese are doing this, in a sense, through social media. but trying to get some more, that is, trying to get the people who do not use the social media and who do not just protest, but to get to the others. That is, a citizen survey, which goes out ideally to everybody, is different from, of course, civic group participation or social media participation, where only a small minority of people come to meetings or protest in the social media. So trying to get others and find out how satisfied they are or not is a valuable source of input for service delivery and policy. Okay, we've gone on. We're end of class. Office hours right now for anybody who wants to talk more. Thank you, folks.
Really quick so I don't interrupt with others. Oh, sorry.